Coming out today. My name is Rachel Jewin, and I'm going to be talking about this plaque that we see behind us over here, the legend of White Bear Lake. White Bear Lake is historically Native American land, as is the entirety of the United States. The earliest inhabitants of the White Bear Lake area were the Dakota and then the Ojibwe, who used it for their migratory hunting and harvesting grounds. The first step of the stealing of this land by the United States was a treaty in 1825, which drew an imaginary line on paper showing the border between the Dakota and the Ojibwe nations. The U.S. designated this area where we are now as Dakota land. This division of land was done in order to divide the Dakota and the Ojibwe so it would be easier for the U.S. government to force them to sign treaties separately. The 1837 land cession treaties with the Ojibwe and then the Dakota were extremely unfair. Under pressure from former white fur traders like Henry Sibley, two treaties were made, first with the Ojibwe and the second with the Dakota, to cede much of Wisconsin and the portion of Minnesota between the Mississippi and the St. Croix rivers. The tribes received some money, but the white fur traders received a large amount to pay off fur trade debts that they claimed against the Dakota and the Ojibwe. According to the latest census data, today, the current population of White Bear Lake is 0.6% Native American, and the public school system has 0.4% of its students identifying as Native American. Keep in mind that the White Bear Township was founded in 1858. Previous to these treaties and settlers, the only white people would have been fur traders, who would have been a small minority of the population in Dakota land. We are also standing by the plaque depicting the legend of White Bear Lake. Both the Ojibwe and the Dakota peoples have a long history of oral tradition passed on through the generations. But in the 1800s, this was seen by white society as inferior to the written word. It is important to recognize that this version of the legend recorded on the plaque was written by white authors, such as Mark Twain, whose goal was to sell more copies of their book rather than faithfully record Native tradition. There's a long history of white authors co-opting Native stories and embellishing them with exaggerated and romanticized details, often portraying Native people as a noble savage or as an Indian princess. Those are stereotypes. It is also important to note that the name of our city, as purportedly taken from the legend, is probably not translated faithfully. The name of this lake comes from the Dakota word Matoska, which means Bear Lake. That's where the name of the city of Matamidi comes from. Early maps labeled the lake as Bears Lake, and the white came later. The change in name is perhaps another change detail inspired by the white legend writers. Much like the legend story being used by non-natives for personal gain, there are also many ways that Native stories and symbols and culture are being used today for monetary gain without benefit to Native communities. Companies which have used Native American imagery on their products are changing their logos. But there are sports teams that use Native American imagery and symbols even after being directly asked by Native American groups to change them. However, although this land was taken away from them, many Native American names have lived on as place names. Remembering the origin of these names in a respectful way helps us to respect those who lived here before us and to reflect upon our relationship with them and with this land. There are countless issues facing the Native American community today that reflect the systematic racism that exists in our community and state, including that Native communities are being harder hit by COVID-19 than white communities. There's an alarming rate of missing and murdered Indigenous women in our state, and the graduation rate for Native American high schoolers is 32 percentage points less than their white classmates. So what can you do right now? Be aware of Native American symbols and language being used for profit by non-Native people and companies. Do not purchase these products or write to these companies and ask them to stop their use of these symbols. Write to your elected representatives and urge them to always keep the impact of the legislation they are writing on the Native American community in mind. A specific thing to currently write about is urging your elected state representatives to include a focus on the Native American community and legislation regarding COVID-19 funds. Specifically, there will be hopefully another round of pandemic relief funds at the national level, and Native nations are asking for more funds to help with the loss from COVID-19, as they didn't receive what they needed during the first round of the CARES Act. Thank you again for coming and joining us today. Here are a couple questions to kind of reflect on as we make our way to the next stop, which is going to be the Philip Brown House. What is something that you've learned at this stop? What is one action step that you can commit to doing this summer? And our next stop is about systemic housing discrimination. What do you know or want to learn about that topic?
Okay, thanks everyone. We're gonna make our way to Philip Brown House, which is just down, that's west. Yes, just down west, okay? So go ahead and start making your way down to Philip Brown House.